Okay, so we've finished with the preparation of the template and getting our edges straightened back up again. This is Clara Walnut, and this being a template stock really was just the intent was not necessarily to get a fine-tuned fit, but really need to get our edges straightened up and lined up for when we recut. So a couple of things to note. I used bondo for a quick inletting or just a quick to reset my margins here. When you use bondo, what you want to do is just take some rim oil on a cotton path or a cotton swab or something like that, and just very lightly touch up the edges where you're going to be setting this into the wood. Bondo is not going to stick to a smooth surface, but I always like to go ahead and add in a little bit of rim oil, not a lot, a very fine mist on the cotton patch, and just very lightly add a little bit of rim oil and you'll be fine here. Something to note here also, on this particular gun there weren't you'll on some of the guns you'll have like on the Brownings or along the tangs here, they'll have recessed areas for cotter pin or for a compression pin. You do not want when you're doing this, you don't want that filling agent, whether it's bondo or glass bedding, to go into those pins, particularly like say like a Parker. In this particular area right here, they'll have a set pin for your top lever. So what I use is I just use some Play-Doh, and I'll go ahead and fill in those areas, and then when you're through, the Play-Doh actually dries, and when it dries it contracts and it'll pretty much just pop out with a toothpick or something like that. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the glass bedding, the final fitting. This is really, again, the emphasis here is not a final fit here. This is really more of just to ensure that I've got all my edges, my margins all lined up and straightened out. When you're cutting, a lot of times what you're going to find is that the wood can be soft or hard. Your cutter, if it gets dull, it will actually rip out some of the wood. It's very difficult obviously to see by the eye, but when you put in your part that you're going to be working with, it'll become more evident. Now in this particular case, these margins turned out to be very nice. I didn't have to make any adjustments here on this at all. But on the receiver, I'll show you here. Right in here was an area here that I wanted to clean up, and going down the side there's an area here that I don't particularly like. I want that to be cleaned up a little bit more, and again that has a lot to do with the wood. As the cutter's cutting it and or it's dull, soft or hard wood, it can actually rip this out just a little bit more than it's actually than you're actually thinking. And that's why I always have my cutters or my stylus is set for about 15 thousandths over. You don't want it so tight that you spend a whole bunch of hours here, but at the same time, you also want to make sure that you don't have too big of gaps. Now to clean up the gaps, we'll talk more about this later. I use glass bed for the final fit, and we'll talk more about that later. With regards to doing any adjustments going down the edge here, what I found is that if you've got glass bed or bondo and you've got an edge here that you're going to be pulling away, those always work out very well. If you're doing it by hand, you'll notice in here I wanted to change some of this just a little bit. I'll come back in for the sear and adjust this later, but I wanted a better edge than the original stock had for when I come down along this edge. I didn't want to slip and bump this up on the margin, so I built this out just a little bit. And so what you'll do is you can take a little piece of wood or whatever, put some aluminum foil around it, which is also a way that you could use on the metal. If you prefer, you could put some aluminum foil around certain edges, particularly the flat edges or flat areas that are going to have a lot of contact, like say for example here on the Merkles, the side plates will have that as well. And I don't really like to just use the release agent or the rim oil approach. I'll probably put a little bit of aluminum foil, and what you can do then is you can build up edges here with a good flat surface that are perpendicular down in here when you go to cutting, and you can build that up, but you'll be either doing that by hand or you'll use aluminum foil on the metal part. And that's the same here on this particular margin. the way the glass bed, I mean the way the bondo came over, there's a slight edge here. It's all it's telling me is that there is a little bit more of a gap here going down on this side than there was on this side. And so what I'm going to do is I'll probably come back and I'll take a straight edge or something and I'll go ahead and fill, and you can't really see it. I know it's being very picky. It's very, very minor. But on my final fits, I like them to be about a 3/1000 is all I want. I don't want them to be so tight that as the wood expands or contracts that it is tightening in on the wood too much, but at the same time I don't like unsightly gaps. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put sort of like a dovetail to where on the back edge, I don't know that I'm getting my hand positioned right here, but I have like a dovetail to where the front edge is touching the wood, but it's more relaxed down here on the bottom. So there's lots of different approaches that you can take to make sure that you got a good fit. But those are just a couple tips on that. So on this particular piece of wood, we are almost ready to go to the next step. I need to go ahead and drill a hole for this trigger plate to fix into the receiver, because now then from here we'll go on, after we drill that hole, we need to go ahead and start working on some of the dimensions. I'm going to be changing the dimensions on this stock. Alright, so that's all there is on that. Oh, one last thing is when you do finish all this and you get all these parts together, you really want this to go together without any effort. You don't want any binding here. So you may very well want to loosen this up so that everything fits in without any force at all as you're doing this. You don't want there to be any binding here, either on the top or the bottom. You want everything to fit in there. It'd be, goes without saying, but you want everything to fit in there very nicely without having to force it in. All right, so okay, so now that we've cut the stock out, the next steps that we're going to be doing is you're going to see me going through some measurements. So I think it's important to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing. Before I proceed here, I want to just point something out here. This particular website, you can just type that in. You'll see that up here in the URL address. But in my opinion, this is a must-read for anybody that's going to be either making a gun stock or anyone that's going to have a gun stock made for them, or just in general when they're shooting, just to understand some of the basics. There's a lot of conversation here, and I think you can boil it down. This is Bob Spencer, by the way. His name's up here at the top of the website. As far as I'm concerned, he does the best job I've ever seen to cleaning this discussion up and breaking it down into the basics of a stock fitting you. If you've ever walked down at the end of a shoot, particularly at a state shoot, or where I'm a trap shooter, if you shoot, typically you shoot 300, 400, 500 rounds, whether it's in a day or over a span of a few days, you shoot 1,000 rounds. You walk down the line, you'll see people that their cheek almost looks like it needs to have stitches, or their face will be beat up, The hands will be. So what we're going to do is you're going to see me make a couple of measurements here as we go through this. And I want to just kind of give you an idea of the first, of course, is if you took a straight edge going across your barrel and extend that out, and then you'll take a measuring tape. And there's 3 measurements. I've added one, E, that he did not have, but I've added one E. The first is going to be B. That's going to be right at the front of the comb. You're going to have measurement E. And what I like to do is have E will be roughly 1/8 of an inch less than E. Now Bob Spencer talks about the American stock going straight across. If that works for you, that's great. The intent there is every time you put your face up there on the stock, you're going to get the same sight picture. That's the objective. If you see people kind of roosting around when they put up a gun stock, they're kind of roosting around on the gun stock. Stock doesn't fit them, and they're trying to get their sight picture, or they're forcing their face down on the comb to get the sight picture, or it's not on the comb and it's raised up just a little bit. You'll see it all. And the reason is because the gun stock doesn't fit them. And so what you're going to do is you're going to make these measurements, and what you're going to see me do here in a few minutes is go through and build up with bondo to the dimensions. Now I know my dimensions. I'm not a stock professional gun stock maker. I'm a hobbyist, but I know what the dimensions that I need to have made for me, and so that's what I'm doing. You will need to experiment, put the template stock on your gun, go shoot it, bring it back. Also put some tape. Just use some packing tape on the bondo, so that it doesn't rub your face there, but you'll use some packing tape on it. But you'll go through this process. B will be about 1/8 of an inch less than E, narrower, or point B will be slightly narrower than, say, point C, or the full width of the buttstock. All of that is so that when the gun fires, there's no wood coming back into your face. In fact, the gun's actually leaving your face. The shot's already left the barrel, but at that point then you have less recoil, or less perceived recoil, and the gun starts to feel more comfortable when you shoot. Point is that when you raise the gun to your shoulder and you stock it, you get the same sight picture without having to rooster around on the stock. The gun, over a long period of time of shooting the gun, is comfortable to shoot, but you'll be able to focus on shooting and not getting beat up at the end of the day. So those are some measurements. Point C, like I said, point E is going to be higher. These guns here, this gun here that he's got is probably more of a field stock. I think it's just for the illustration purposes. But mine would have been actually higher here. And then it'll slope down to point C, which for me is about 2.5 inches. And again, you need to adjust this. The next measurement you're going to see me take is from the trigger to the back of the buttstock. I do not go to the pad. The reason for that is because I can get different thicknesses of pad. And so you'll need to account for that, whether you're going to be shooting in the summertime or the wintertime. You'll swap out the pad. But this measurement that you'll see me take from the trigger going all the way back to the back of the wood is another important critical measurement. The other measurement that I'll do is the toe, and what you'll do is I'll go through a conversation. I actually cut the stock. I twist it out. For me, it's about 18 degrees. You can measure that because if you've still got, before you finish sanding it, you'll still have your horizontal line, and so you just rotate that about 18 degrees, and for me, I know right about where it's at, and then I may make some final adjustments to it as well. The last measurement that you're going to take is the pitch. Now, the best way to do this is with the butt pad off. You'll stand this up on the floor, and then you'll have, say, like the corner a wall or something like that, and then you'll put the right up here at the top of the receiver, so it'll be touching, and then this will be squared on the floor, and you're going to measure the distance from the wall to the top of your barrel. Now, the differences in the length of the barrel are all relative, and so it's important to make note of that. For me, it's roughly about 2 to 3 inches there, and you want positive pitch. If you're different, depending on your body dimensions, you may want more or less pitch. Some people are real barrel-chested. Maybe they have less pitch. The intent there is that when the gun fires, it does not fall down out of your shoulder, particularly on doubles. Rather, if you've got the wrong pitch on that gun, when you shoot and you're swinging over for the second shot, well, the gun, if you've got the wrong pitch, the buttstocks move down out of your shoulder, so that now when you swing over to your next shot, you're not going to be on target. And so whether it's a single shot or double shot, the pitch is also part of your gun fit as well as perceived recoil, and particularly. So hopefully this will clear things up. I didn't want this to be a real long recording here. You can go and read this from Bob Spencer. I think this is a great discussion that he walks you through really these measurements and the importance of the measurement. And I think it's something to take into consideration as you go through. And that's what you're going to see me doing.